Now, the January 6th committee has referred Donald Trump to the Department of Justice to face 4 criminal charges. Now, this follows an 18-month investigation. Now, here are what those charges could include: obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the United States, making a false statement, and inciting an insurrection. Now, here is a clip of the charges being read out earlier by Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin.
We believe that the evidence described by my colleagues today and assembled throughout our hearings warrants a criminal referral of former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others for violations of this statute. The whole purpose and obvious effect of Trump's scheme were to obstruct, influence, and impede this official proceeding, the central moment for the lawful transfer of power in the United States. Second, we believe that there is more than sufficient evidence to refer former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others for violating Title 18, Section 371. This statute makes it a crime to conspire to defraud the United States. In other words, to make an agreement to impair, obstruct, or defeat the lawful functions of the United States government by deceitful or dishonest means.
Let's bring in the CBC's Makta Gabriselassie live from Capitol Hill. Makta, we just heard those charges being read. This is a former president of the United States, and I still can't believe this, really. Take us through what happened and what other committee members had to say this afternoon.
Well, Hannah, those were some of the charges there. The other 2 charges that I believe we didn't get to was a charge of insurrection, and there's also one of making false statements to the U.S. government. And so essentially this committee is saying that former President Donald Trump and others committed several crimes, all in an effort to keep him in power, and that all led to the attack on the Capitol. So what we heard from the members today is that the evidence showed that Trump had this premeditated plan to claim that the election was stolen if he lost, and that he ignored the advice of those advisors around him when he said that there was widespread fraud, and they said that that didn't exist, that he ignored the courts, that he tried to put fake electors in place to change the results, and try to pressure election officials in states as well as Department of Justice and others to try to find votes or change the results, including trying to allegedly pressure Vice President Mike Pence not to certify the election, all in an effort to keep him in power. The members of the committee say the evidence showed that he was told that this was false and wrong, and that he ignored the advice he was getting, and in the end that this all led to the attack on the Capitol, and that in fact the former president summoned his supporters to be there at the Capitol that day. So here's more from the chair of the committee.
This committee is nearing the end of its work. But as the country, we remain in strange and uncharted waters. We've never had a president of the United States stir up a violent attempt to block the transfer of power. I believe nearly 2 years later, this is still a time of reflection and reckoning. If we are to survive as a nation of laws and democracy, this can never happen again.
Now, in an effort to wrap up the investigation, the committee members played a sampling of some of the evidence that they've gathered over the last 18 months. That includes text messages, phone recordings, video testimony from various witnesses, including White House advisors, state officials, and even members of that mob that day that attacked the Capitol. So here is more on the president's or former president's alleged responsibility on what happened that day from the vice chair. Take a listen.
This was an utter moral failure and a clear dereliction of duty. Evidence of this can be seen in the testimony of President Trump's own White House counsel and several other White House witnesses. No man who would behave that way at that moment in time can ever serve in any position of authority in our nation again. He is unfit for any office.
So here you are having this committee make these criminal referrals to the Department of Justice, but the committee itself has no power to actually lay charges. That is up to the DOJ, and now we wait to see if they in fact act on the recommendations made by this committee. We do know that the DOJ already has its own investigations looking into Trump's actions, including on January 6th, Hannah.
So what's next, Mukta?
Well, at this point, we are still waiting for the full report on this investigation. We're expecting for that to come out on Wednesday. We're also waiting to see how former President Donald Trump reacts to the latest news. We know that when we expected that the committee was going to call for criminal charges to be laid, that he did go on his social media platform, and he, at that time, called the committee members misfits and thugs. He referred to his actions around January 6th, including the speech that he gave that day to his supporters, and he called his actions mild and loving. We're waiting to see now if he posts any other statements on his platform. I checked a little while ago. I didn't see anything else.
Okay, well, let us know if you do. Mukta Gabriselese in Washington, thank you.
You're welcome.
Elizabeth Wydra is a Supreme Court litigator and the president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, and she explains the significance of a criminal referral.
This is a very momentous occurrence. This is the first time that criminal referrals from Congress have ever been made for a former president of the United States. And it's not just on, some technicality or something like that. This is the most fundamental grave charge that could be made to an elected leader, that he specifically intended to disrupt, overthrow the American democratic system. This is quite a historic moment, and I think a really somber one, frankly.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we heard from the chair when he opened today as well. Can we go through the four alleged crimes and, talk them through a little bit? Let's go insurrection. That one is probably the clearest to everyone in their head, but this might be the toughest one for the DOJ, right?
Yes, this is an extremely serious charge. In fact, in the kind of foot soldier trials that have been going on surrounding January 6th, most of the time they are being charged with seditious conspiracy as kind of the most serious charge. So actually referencing the idea that Trump aided, incited, abetted insurrection directly is very serious. But they certainly believe that they have amassed evidence, and they will be turning that evidence over to the Justice Department to show that he summoned the mob. He knew the mob would be violent. He did nothing to call off the violent mob, and in fact, fanned the flames further. So they feel clearly very confident to go to that extreme level beyond just the other three charges that I know we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah, so obstruction of an official proceeding. Break that down for our viewers as well.
Yeah, so the reason why January 6th was an important day was because that was the certification of the electoral votes. That would have been kind of the final formality in President Biden becoming president of the United States after the American people voted him into office. And so the January 6th insurrection was intended and did for a while stop that constitutional process from taking place. And so that's what this charge is all about, the fact that they stopped the counting of those votes in Congress in order to try to keep President Trump in power despite the vote of the people. Third one, conspiracy to defraud the federal government. Yeah, so this one is interesting, and I think you know, we definitely heard evidence in the series of hearings about this, but I think that will be interesting to really get to look at more closely when the report comes out. Final report comes out on Wednesday. There certainly was a lot of money raised by President Trump surrounding these efforts. They talked today about how it's unclear how some of this money was used. And in fact, it seemed as if it was at least being dangled out there to try to convince some witnesses either not to testify or to change their testimony from what would have been truthful and apparently damning to President Trump.
And finally, conspiracy to make false statements.
Yes. So this, you know, and they made clear that they didn't know they weren't going to limit themselves to the entire, they weren't going to lay out the entire scope of false statements made, because presumably there are more than they even know about. But they did directly discuss the fake electors scheme that had been put up by Trump and his allies, where they would try to get electors other than the ones who would actually represent the vote of the people that voted President Biden in. So all of these are very serious charges. They're criminal referrals to the Department of Justice. And now, of course, it's up to the Justice Department to decide whether or not to bring these charges.
Wider says that while criminal referrals are hugely symbolic and historic, she says it doesn't mean criminal charges will be brought against Donald Trump and his allies. She says the decision rests with the Department of Justice. In other January 6 news, jury selection gets underway today in the trial of the Proud Boys leader and 4 other members of the right-wing extremist group. They're charged with seditious conspiracy for plotting to attack the U.S. Capitol in a bid to overturn President Joe Biden's victory. All 5 have pleaded not guilty. If convicted of sedition, they could face up to 20 years in prison. The trial is expected to last at least 6 weeks.